Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to AI Giants, another great session that we have prepared for you. I'm your host, Jaime Jorge, and today we're talking about AI governance. We have a special guest to explore this topic with us. He is Ray Eitel-Porter. Ray is a leading voice on AI safety and ethics, a pioneer of responsible AI, and he built Accenture's internal AI compliance program. He's also the co-author of a new book launching literally this week called Governing the Machine, about practical AI governance for organizations. Hi, Ray.
Hello. Thank you very much for inviting me to join you.
Very glad to have you here. So before we start, a bit of housekeeping. We have, as always, three things. We're going to launch a poll to start gauging a bit your use of AI coding tools in your organization. That's to start very soon. And there it is. And so please answer so we can see the results at the end. We please post questions in the QA section, or if you're joining us from LinkedIn Live, post them in the comments. We'll make sure to get those questions back to us. And last but not least, we're running a survey on AI coding risks, and we'd love if you can participate. By participating and sharing your email, we'll share the results with you as soon as possible. Just don't, please, fill the survey while we're having the session. Get the link and fill it afterwards. And with that out of the way, let's start. It seems that we live still at the age of could or expect with AI. AI returns beyond the actual AI model makers. They don't seem that they have arrived yet. So there's a lot of shovels, but not yet a lot of gold. So much that last week the main topic was a bubble. So the first question I have for you, Ray, is it early to be talking about governance when companies seem a bit lost about what to do or build with AI?
No, I don't think so at all. And in fact, I believe that one of the reasons that companies, that large organizations that I'm working with, and indeed smaller ones, are struggling to actually implement AI is precisely because they don't necessarily trust the outcomes, and they don't have the governance processes in place to make sure that where their teams are thinking about using AI, they're asking the right questions and assessing that use of AI for risk. AI governance is the thing that really gives organizations the confidence to use AI and to know that they have maximized the chance that the AI will really deliver on the return on investment that is promised, that it won't go wrong, because AI governance is actually fundamentally about stopping AI from going wrong. There's very few people out there who want to cause harm or want to have AI give bad results, and governance is what helps you to make sure that that you can actually deliver on the results of AI.
Makes sense. At the same time, we're seeing a lot of transformation in the enterprise. We're seeing companies that are reshifting their workforce and trying to reskill the workforce to become more AI native, AI aware of tooling, right? And so, from your point of view, how is AI reshaping our world?
Well, I think that AI is a tool that pretty much everybody needs to learn to use in their, in their day-to-day life, be that in a private life or be that in the work life. It's not dissimilar to, a PC. Back when, PCs first came, they weren't used by very many people, and people had to learn how to use Word or Excel or PowerPoint or email even. We didn't have email at one point. Those tools have transformed the way that we work. I mean, it's hard to imagine, a world today where we don't email people or where we can't use Excel to do calculations. But people got the hang of that, and it made a tremendous improvement in terms of their working lives because it made lots of things easier and smoother and took away a bunch of boring tasks. So people should think of AI as a similar tool that can really help them to do their work much better. And I really see examples of this where organizations, where the people within organizations are keen to embrace AI, to have the right training, so that they can use these tools because they want to be getting rid of certain aspects of their job. They want to be the person who is making the ultimate decisions. They want to be in control. But often there are large parts of our lives or our work that aren't particularly interesting or enjoyable. And it would be nice to be able to have some sort of machine that would help us to do those things.
As we shift more into the actual topic of the session, you're co-author of a new book called Governing the Machine that is launching this week. Congrats, by the way.
Thank you.
On this body of work. The book explores practical and tactical guidance for organizations adopting AI. I had a pleasure of reading ahead of time. We're going to drop a link for you to have access also to the book. One of the things that you explore in the book is, and I'm going to quote, is that AI systems, no matter how sophisticated, must be held to the same standards of accountability as human decisions. Now, as we think about software engineering, I feel as though we are at the epicenter of AI automation, because we're not only writing code with AI, but we're also reviewing code with AI. We're deploying code with AI. We're checking, monitoring with AI. So it feels that the checks and balances that we put for humans to check the work of other humans, we're now replacing with AI as well. So my question to you is, when is AI too much? Where is the limit?
Well, you're certainly right that AI is being rapidly adopted in coding and by people who have technical roles. I don't think it's easy to give a blanket answer and say AI is too much always in these situations. So one of the things about AI is that it is very, very context specific. So a critical consideration will be, what are the consequences of the use of AI in this particular situation? So if I'm doing something which is highly consequential, let's think of healthcare, financial services, allocating benefits, safety systems. There's a long list, of areas where software used in those worlds could have very significant impacts as a result. So we need to apply higher standards in those situations to software that's being used in a situation which is helpful, but it's not mission critical. It's not actually going to fundamentally, alter somebody's life if it goes wrong. So I think that's really quite an important distinction. I was chairing a panel the other day at a conference, and there were a couple of good examples that came up from panel members. One was a company that was using AI to automate the returns process, and they were selling relatively low cost goods, and for them it was absolutely worthwhile to give the AI a large amount of automation, because it could do a pretty good assessment on whether a product had been delivered damaged or not based on someone uploading a photo. And then it could refund the €3 or the €5 or whatever it was, for that product, saving a lot of time for human processing. And even if it got it wrong occasionally, it was probably a pretty good trade-off, economically speaking, for that organization. But then there were other people on the panel who were working in areas where the consequences of a mistake could have been, much more serious. Their coders were also using AI as a tool, but they would have much more, human checking and review in the process because of the potential consequences.
Yeah. So it depends, right? I think it's always the right answer when it comes to software.
It's always annoying when you get the answer, it depends. But yes, it does depend.
When we talk, one of the things that your book approaches is also human involvement, right? As we talk about exactly that human element that needs to continue existing as we work with AI. And it describes three approaches: human in control, where humans have full authority and approve everything; human on the loop, where AI has autonomy but humans have oversight; and then human in the loop, where AI and humans collaborate. Where do you think software and AI tools, AI coding tools, live in these three categories? And before answering, obviously bear in mind the pervasive, ubiquitous, and critical nature of software, right? And that exists everywhere?
Yeah, again, I think it depends a bit on the on the use of the software, but I would have thought that human in the loop, as in a collaborative tool, is probably a good way to start. So the human is using the AI to produce pieces of code, to assist, to review, to speed up, accelerate, etc. Undoubtedly to write certain parts, but it's very much a two-way process. I think, rather than the AI necessarily going off and completing the whole program and then a human coming along and checking it afterwards, because it's probably going to be much harder to check. If the whole thing's been written autonomously by AI, it's going to be much harder for the human then to actually review that. So until until an organization is very comfortable, and until they're sure that the tools are really good, I would probably go for the human in the loop, as in collaborative approach.
Most companies are adopting AI coding tools, and what we're seeing is many are without controls, just trying to obviously create these proofs of concept that's at scale and then create standards over time. Question here is, and also a chapter of your book, is whose responsibility is AI governance really? Should developers, so individual contributors, feel as accountable as leaders, or is that something? Are we putting too much pressure and responsibility, like we did with Shift Left? We just put everything on the developer again.
So I think that we are all responsible and accountable, right? Developers, end users, everybody needs to play their part here. But I think it's critical in an organization that guidance comes from the top. So what I have seen, and in fact, if you go back a few years to sort of the beginning, let's say, of the responsible AI movement, or people thinking about AI governance, etc., the impetus was often coming from frontline data scientists, from frontline coders, who found that they were developing something. Let's take a data science model where they were trying to predict, let's say, a credit lending situation or something, and they weren't sure how much bias they should allow to be in that model. As we may recognize, there's always some bias. In almost all cases, there is some bias in a model. The question is, how much is acceptable? And often there's a trade-off. The more bias you remove, the less accurate models often become. And what we saw was that frontline data scientists were kind of being forced to make these decisions, these quite important decisions, without any clear guidance from someone more senior as to what was an appropriate threshold to apply. And so I think that is quite illustrative of the way that organizations need to behave. The senior leaders need to put in place AI governance. They need to put in place policies. They need to put in place guidance that says to people, either here are the appropriate thresholds, or here is the route for talking to somebody or taking it to a decision committee or whatever. What is the escalation route that you should go through if you're not comfortable, you find yourself in this situation? So the onus is on the frontline developer to make sure that they put their hand up or that they follow those right processes, but the onus is not on the frontline developer to make all of those individual decisions themselves, because they should be collective decisions that are consistent across the organization and guided from the top.
Right. And it seems obviously that training is a huge component of that prefaces all of that conversation, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. One of my favorite topics, I think it's my favorite concept of the book that I'm taking, because it's also very relevant to our industry, that is essentially engineering, software engineering, and security and quality, is automation bias, which is a concept, as you explain in the book, whereas the assumption that AI is always correct, which causes obviously less responsibility for the outcomes of using AI. So I suspect, with very little data to prove, that we're seeing a lot of it with that automation bias in software development. With the models becoming, as we become more accustomed to developing with AI, we're more prone to clicking accept on the suggestions of our coding AI tools. What do we do about it? And is that really a problem? Immediately as a follow-up question, because if the models are getting better over time, won't they just provide us right answers and this will not be an issue anyway?
So ironically, I think the better the models get, the worse problem this becomes. And why do I say that? Because if your AI is making mistakes 25% of the time, you're going to be fairly alert to it, because that's a lot of mistakes, right? But if your AI is only making a mistake every, once or twice in 100, you're much more likely to overlook it, because you're much more likely to be lulled into this false sense of security. But those 1 or 2 times in the 100, they could be the things that cause someone's death if it's a safety critical system, or if it's a medical, application or something like that. So this heightened vigilance for the smaller number of cases where the AI goes wrong is really critical. Now, we've seen an increasing number of studies actually showing that automation bias is a problem. There's one we quote in the book that is a study about radiologists, where they took a group of radiologists and they had obviously a control set, etc. But with one group, they fed in some false positives from AI and said, oh, the AI has indicated that this particular image is cancer, let's say. And what they found was that in the case of inexperienced or moderately experienced radiologists, their accuracy dropped from 80% to 20% when they were confronted with these false examples, as in they very frequently trusted the AI when they shouldn't have done. For very experienced radiologists, that was less the case, but it still dropped from 80 to 40%. So this is just one example. And I like the way that you say it's one of your favorite parts of the book. It's actually one part of the book that I think we almost underestimated, because I think this is going to become an increasing problem. What do we do about it? Well, I love the phrase that Salesforce, I think it is, have adopted. They talk about something called cognitive speed bumps. And what they think about is designing processes or systems in a way that try to make people think. So you don't get lulled into a routine, but you make people sort of sit up and think. And an analogy for me would be a number of companies that I know run phishing, dummy phishing attacks, for emails that come in where you shouldn't click on the link because it's going to be someone who's trying to steal your information. And the InfoSec department will send out some dummy ones of these to see if they can catch people out. And they're often quite good. And, people do click on them, and then a little thing pops up and says, oh, that was a mistake. This was a test. And if you click on the wrong type, if you fail the test more than 2 or 3 times, sometimes you have to sit a training course or something like that. I think we will need to introduce these kinds of speed bumps, if you like, into our processes to keep people really on their toes and make sure that they are alert and checking.
Make people think.
Yeah.
Another thing that you mentioned in your book, and I'm going to quote, is that smaller companies with more limited resources tend to be less advanced in their implementation of AI governance. One of the things that we put as an hypothesis in our company is that AI, when leveraged by threat actors, hackers, it increases their reach through automation. They can make more sophisticated attacks. So even in your example of phishing, they could do what's called spear phishing, which is get all the data from someone and do an email that is so detailed and personable that you want to click it because it seems real. And so obviously this is also about cybersecurity, but what is a minimal set of guidance for these companies, because they can now be addressed and attacked like it wasn't possible before, or at least economically viable before. What is the MVP version of AI governance for mid-sized and small companies?
So I think we maybe need to split that into two parts. So there's the piece around the cybersecurity risk of people outside the organization using AI to attack. That is a very real danger, and I think we're going to see much more sophisticated attacks as you describe, and that's something where frankly there's almost no there's no easy answer for that. I mean, companies need to be extremely vigilant, really keeping up to date with the latest approaches for protecting against cyber threats. And if you take the UK, we've seen an increasing number of high-profile and really nasty attacks on even large companies, right? So smaller companies are going to be, or organizations are going to be even more vulnerable. So I think that's a challenge. In terms of the sort of minimum viable product, if you like, for AI governance in a smaller organization, I think the key thing is having some way of identifying where AI is going to be used. That's absolutely the starting point. So whatever systems you have, typically what I say is look for where the money is spent, right? Because if you're going to introduce AI, it either means you're going to spend money on some third-party product or service, which might have AI in it, or it means you're going to dedicate some internal resource, which probably means allocating a person or a team or something to build something or do something using AI. So I would say look for those approval points internally, ask the question, is AI going to be used here? If it is, then a simple risk triage to understand, is this a potentially high risk or is it a lower risk use of AI? If it's a lower risk use, just get on with it. That's absolutely fine. Don't worry. But if it's a higher risk use, then you do need to start asking questions. Those questions will be suitability questions, qualitative ones, but then there'll also be some technical questions about performance on bias, about explainability, about accuracy, privacy, use of the data, and so forth.
Makes sense. I want to shift to regulation.
Mm-hmm.
And talk a little bit about the EU AI Act, which has been top of mind for model builders and for many compliance reasons, but now as well for companies, particularly if they reside in the EU. And my question to you is, what are milestones or timelines or advice that you can provide companies to prepare and for what's coming with regards to the AI Act?
So the one important provision of the Act is actually already enforced. That came into force in February of this year, which is the requirement to provide AI training for anybody in the organization who's using AI. So you have to be able to provide a suitable level of AI literacy, as it's called, for anyone using AI, and be able to document that you have done that. There were also some prohibited uses of AI which came into effect in February, but most companies probably won't be impacted by those. I think the next key milestone for people to be aware of is August of 2026, when the provisions for high-risk uses of AI come into effect. High risk, as defined by the EU AI Act, is a pretty long list of use cases or uses or industries. Think of it as anything that can have a significant impact on humans primarily, but also on the environment or on society. And there is a very clearly defined list in the EU AI Act of which applications, which areas would fall into this. So, healthcare, financial services, HR, education, recruitment, the safety systems, etc. And for those types of uses, again, the EU AI Act has a pretty clear list of things that need to be put in place. Two critical ones would be a risk management system, which it means essentially a process for identifying the use of AI and then asking questions to assess the level of risk, and then obviously doing something about it if there is a high level of risk. And the other thing would be then that actual risk assessment itself. So an impact assessment, it's often called, which has the list of all the questions and technical analyses, etc., that you might want to carry out. And the good news for organizations is that ISO has brought out a couple of standards that are quite helpful. There is 4201, which helps to define what a risk management system should look like. And there is 4205, which provides guidance for an impact assessment, an AI impact assessment. These may not be perfect standards, but they're certainly a very good place to start.
And do you think is GDPR a proxy for understanding the impact of the AI Act once it comes into full effect in Europe? You think that's going to be the same impact company-wise that we should expect to see?
In Europe, yes, definitely. I think it'll be very similar in terms of its impact to GDPR. Globally, I'm not so sure. So if you'd asked me that question a year ago, I would have said, yes, I think that the EU AI Act is probably going to be adopted as a de facto global standard, in much the same way as if you look at many international, not all, but many multinational firms, many American firms doing business in Europe, etc. Many of them have adopted GDPR as their kind of data privacy standard because it's simpler to have one standard globally than having a bunch of different standards in different countries. I thought there was a pretty good chance that would happen with the EU AI Act, but then with the new Trump administration in the US being very kind of, against federal level regulation, I think there is less chance that the EU AI Act will be adopted globally. And I think you'll see more companies probably investing in having like different standards. They clearly, if they want to do business in the EU, they have to follow the EU AI Act. Just to be clear, the fact that you're an overseas company doesn't exempt you. If you are doing business in the EU, you have to follow the EU AI Act. But you wouldn't need to follow it for what you're doing in the US or for business you're doing in Latin America or somewhere else.
In kind of exploring a line of thinking there, what do you think this brings in terms of our competitiveness in the EU? You think ultimately can regulate to a point that the industry works better? We obviously hear the model builders talk about stagnation and blockage to innovation. What's your opinion? Do you think this is ultimately a good thing more on the long run?
That's a very tricky question. In an ideal world, we would have something like the EU AI Act globally, because I think everyone would then benefit from that. But it is a challenge when you have different regions pursuing very different approaches. And I do worry that there is a danger that Europe will get disadvantaged by the additional regulations, because they potentially will slow down some aspects of innovation. They shouldn't do, because actually having good governance, should really give you the confidence that you're doing things right. But it does cost a bit more money to put in place some of these governance processes. And that may be a challenge for some organizations. My view is we need to really help European companies to see governance not as a nasty compliance burden that is very difficult, but as something which should be part and parcel of the development process, and that you should just do it as a normal thing, in much the same way as if you think about a data scientist or someone who's coding. you need to produce accurate answers, right? Your code needs to work, or if you're a data scientist, you need to get an accurate answer with your model. So accuracy isn't a sort of nasty compliance thing. It's a requirement. Now, if we take an example of bias, let's say, and discrimination, if your model is actually not accurate for a large number of people within your target population, that's a problem from a bias and discrimination perspective, but it's also a problem from a business perspective, because it means that you're excluding those people from your target market because your product or service isn't going to work very well for them. So much better, surely, to segment your target market and say, let's build different models for different parts of the population so we can be very accurate for everybody. That opens up the market. So I think we need to try to adopt this mindset that says, actually, if we ask these right questions at the beginning and we structure our AI products and services with that in mind, it can actually be an advantage and not necessarily a disadvantage.
My last question to you is, before we open up to our audience, and by the way, if you have any questions, I already see a few that are highly engaging. My last question is, if you had to give just one piece of advice to our listeners, and obviously with the context that you wrote a whole book about it, just one piece of advice to improve AI compliance to our audience, what would that be?
I guess the most important thing is to identify where AI is actually being used. And I know that may sound a bit trite and a bit obvious, but it's not quite so easy, because you already said in the coding world, pretty much everyone is using AI, right? So we need to recognize that, and therefore we need to give the right training and make sure that the right risk assessment questions are being asked. But if we look beyond that, low code, no code type tools are becoming increasingly prevalent, making it increasingly easy for many more people in an organization to start developing small applications of AI, not necessarily the most sophisticated ones, but still ones that could potentially go wrong and cause harm. More and more companies are embedding AI in their products and services. So if you're buying or licensing a service or a product from somebody else, there's a high chance it's got AI in it. So you need to be aware of that and make sure that your supplier has asked the right questions, has made sure that it's accurate and so forth. Because if you use it, you can end up being liable for the implications as well. So I think the key is identifying where AI is being used, and then with the appropriate training, making sure that everybody is asking the right questions.
Brilliant. Thank you. Let's all open up the question. Start seeing some of the questions from our audience. I'll start with a question from Claudia. What are some real world examples of good AI governance?
So let me take an example from a small government agency where I've just been appointed to sit on their AI ethics board. And I went to the first meeting last week. And I must be honest, I wasn't expecting them to be doing an awful lot with AI. Certainly in the UK, government agencies are under pressure for funding. They don't have much money. They're being asked to do more and more. And I was not expecting them to be particularly sophisticated with AI. What I found actually was that they had already formulated a very good set of AI principles. First and foremost amongst those was humans will make every final decision. So AI will be a tool. It will not make decisions, but it'll be a tool. I found that they had mandated a 4-hour training course for every member of the organization, and that there was massive uptake. People were actually clamoring to get on the first courses because they really They were, initially they were uncertain. They didn't know much about AI, but they really wanted to learn. And they saw it as a real way of accelerating the work that they could do, because they could all see tasks in their day-to-day work that were not interesting. I was given an example where, a caseworker has to start by assembling a sort of timeline of things that have happened in a complaint. And that means looking at a number of different documents. Well, these were stored in a system as PDFs, and they were often just numbered with completely meaningless names. So dozens, hundreds of documents, and you don't know what's in them, right? So the poor caseworker has to open up all the documents to figure out what came first and which ones are important and which ones aren't important. The AI can do that, right? It can open the documents, it can sort them into date order, it can give them a decent title and sort of describe what's in there. You as the caseworker then have to read them and you have to make your decisions. But the time saved was fantastic. So this came about by them having a good set of principles and then looking systematically at areas within their operations where they thought that AI could be used to value, and then putting in place the right checks to make sure that people had the training and that we're going to ask the right questions and that they understood what would be risky and what wouldn't be risky in how they would use AI.
Polly also asks, how can companies measure whether their AI systems are being governed responsibly?
So that's a tricky one. I think the most important thing is enforcing some kind of workflow. And if you're a smaller company, you don't want to go overboard with sophisticated tools for this. But what I mean is essentially documenting whether the right questions have been asked at the right part in the process. Many on the audience here will be software developers. We all know that companies typically have a software development lifecycle. They'll have some kind of process with stage gates, etc., that you go through from ideation, data selection, model development, model training, model testing, etc. So the simplest thing is to determine a set of questions which need to be asked at each step in the process, and some tests that need to be undertaken, and then make sure that you have documented when a particular project has gone through those stages, store the test results, make a note of who has signed off, if it needs some sort of approval or sign off, and store that. And that's probably the best way of proving and recording that your projects have been responsibly governed. And that's the kind of information as well that a regulator would be looking for. If there were ever a problem later, the regulator would be looking for that kind of evidence to see that you had been asking the right questions, documenting the answers.
Makes sense. Amy asks, in what respects should your AI governance approach change as your company scales? What are some of the pitfalls to watch out for?
Well, one of the things that you will need to do as you scale is to systematize and potentially automate parts of that governance process. If you're a small company, you might be able to do what I just described in an Excel sheet and keep track of things, on a fairly small scale like that, and just save the results onto some secure drive and so on. If you're starting to introduce much larger volumes as the company's scaling, you're going to want to have some kind of more automated process control that presents the questions to people, stores the results, and so forth. And I see, a lot of companies may use existing process control software for that, something like ServiceNow, if they're already using it for other things in the organization. The other approach that I saw working really interestingly, and I thought was really ingenious from one company, which is an example I quote in the book, they were scaling, and they were quite a larger organization, and they didn't have the budget to build a big central team to check all of the use of AI and so on. So what they did instead was they built a transparent assessment process, risk assessment process, and they opened it up so that anyone in the company could look at projects that were going through the assessment and what the risks were that were being flagged and what the results were that were coming up, etc. And effectively what they were doing was sort of crowdsourcing their AI risk assessment and oversight. And they got a lot of people who were really quite interested in engaging with that. And they found as a sort of knock-on benefit that it meant that it shared knowledge across the organization, and people found out about projects that were happening somewhere else that they weren't aware of that could save them time or they could collaborate on. And I thought it was a very clever way of turning sort of necessity, as in not having the budget to put in place a central team to do this, into an advantage by crowdsourcing that oversight.
Tim asks, what is the viability of using disparate models to peer review the output of any given model to catch the 1 or 2 out of 100?
I mean, it's definitely a technique that people are using. And I think it's something that will, that we will continue to improve and move towards, because AI reviewing AI has to be part of the solution going forwards, without a doubt. Especially to the previous question that came, especially as we get scale and as we get volume, AI is good at dealing with volume and scale. And so it makes sense to me that we will absolutely use AI to check other AI. And maybe it's, AI is checking AI and there's another AI checking the checker AI. Let's see how many
order effects.
Exactly. How many layers we need. But yes.
Claudia asks, it's no secret that the EU seems more interested in regulating AI than the US. Can the EU alone affect global AI practices, or will its influence be limited without US or China alignment?
Yeah, this comes back to that question we were discussing a little bit earlier in the conversation. It definitely has some influence on other countries, because you have a lot of companies which are based in the US and in China, which wish to do business in Europe, and Europe is a significant market. And they can't do business in Europe unless they follow the EU regulations. So it will have some positive impact, definitely. And there may be some improvements and things that are made because of the EU AI Act in the products or services that these companies develop, that they just say, well, actually, that's better. We'll use that globally. Whether it becomes, a de facto standard that everybody uses in other markets, I'm not sure that that's going to happen, but I still think it can have a positive benefit.
How can smaller companies compete with the big guys when it comes to AI talent and resources? Remote work.
That depends on culture.
Right.
There are advantages and disadvantages of working for a large company, but certainly if you're working for a smaller company, people typically have more responsibility early, and they have more flexibility. Some might say they have more fun. I think it's that entrepreneurial feeling that is different, the cultural feeling in a smaller company, I think is what has to be the key advantage.
And the last question from our audience, from Dr. Safa Hassan. How can AI tools be accepted? What should organizations look for before integrating AI tools into the workflow?
I think there are two measures. One measure is, will it actually improve things, right? So you shouldn't be introducing AI just for the sake of doing AI. So you need to be confident that there's going to be some return on the investment, be that an improved quality of the output, better customer service, a better product, or some reduction in cost, or a better experience. So there needs to be a tangible positive benefit. And then the second criteria is, but that needs to be achieved without causing any harm or any of the negative consequences, that we talked about, or without exposing the organization to too much risk. So I would take the two, and I think that's important, because if we just look at the sort of the risk side, that's not enough. We've got to look at the positive value contribution as well.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for looking at some of these questions. And with this, we're nearing the end. Before we end, let's look at our poll results just to see how are people using or not. And so how extensively does your organization use AI coding tools? And it seems that 40% are already using AI coding tools embedded in day-to-day delivery, and several teams rely on AI tools, but adoption is not universal. So this mimics a bit our experience talking to few engineering teams that most are already seeing adoption, even if not everyone. So great to see this. And that was our session. Thank you for joining us today, everyone. Thank you, Ray, for accepting your invitation and kindly replying to our curious questions. Once again, Governing the Machine, launching this week. You can find a link to access the book below. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here, Ray.
My pleasure. Thank you. Great questions from you and great questions from the audience. So that's always the most fun bit for me, is giving me some challenges. So that was fantastic. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, today we had a great conversation with Ray Eitel-Porter about AI governance. I hope you had as much fun as I had. As always, Codacy is an end-to-end solution for building products securely and safely. Make sure you test our Guardrails product today. That's our show. Join us next time as we meet the team at Augment Code on November 13th. So they build AI coding tools, and we'll explore behind the scenes with them as well. Have a great rest of your week. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you soon.